The arrivals terminal at an international airport in mid-May is typically a place of quiet transitions. Players slip through the sliding glass doors unnoticed, their oversized racket bags slung over tired shoulders, their minds already turning toward the practice courts of Europe. It is a familiar, almost rhythmic routine that has defined the professional tennis circuit for generations. Yet, what occurred in the northern reaches of France this week disrupted that long-standing quietude entirely. There was an unmistakable electricity in the air, a collective intake of breath that signaled something far grander than the mere arrival of a qualifying draw athlete. This was the sort of reception usually reserved for rock stars or returning political icons. For those who have spent decades inside the commentary booths of the world's grandest stadiums, watching the sport evolve from the country club exclusivity of the 20th century to the globalized spectacle of today, the scene was both startling and profoundly evocative. It forced a memory back to the early days of the millennium when a young Pardorn Strickefin would return to Bangkok, or when Li Na first brought the weight of 1 billion expectations to the red clay of Paris. The sport has always possessed these rare, seismic moments where a single individual becomes more than a competitor. They become a vessel for the collective identity of a nation. What we are witnessing right now in the context of Philippine tennis is precisely that species of cultural phenomenon. It is an awakening. For decades, Southeast Asia remained an afterthought in the high corridors of the Women's Tennis Association. The power bases were firmly entrenched in Eastern Europe, the United States, and the traditional academies of Spain and France. To see that hegemony challenged not merely by an exceptional talent, but by an unprecedented wave of national fervor, is to understand that the geography of tennis is shifting beneath our feet. The sheer scale of the digital congregation surrounding this arrival, tens of thousands of citizens tracking flight paths, monitoring practice schedules, and dissecting social media updates, speaks to a passion that feels entirely foreign to the often sterile atmosphere of modern tennis. It feels more akin to the tribal loyalty of World Cup football or the frenzied devotion of an Olympic basketball campaign. The quiet, polite applause traditionally associated with the sport is being replaced by something far more visceral, something louder. This sudden convergence of cultural expectation and athletic reality arrives at a critical juncture in the tennis calendar. The Strasbourg Open has long served as a crucial proving ground. It is the final opportunity to adjust one's footing, to calibrate the slide, and to accustom the lungs to the heavy, damp air of the European spring before the circus moves to the Bois de Boulogne. The clay here is demanding. It does not tolerate hesitation. To understand the gravity of this tournament is to understand the historical context of the clay court swing itself. This is not the lightning-fast hard courts of North America, or the pristine, low-bouncing lawns of SW19. Clay requires an entirely different vocabulary of movement and tactical execution. It requires patience. It demands an appreciation for the slow construction of a point, the understanding that a winner cannot simply be hit from the baseline without proper preparation. For a young player from an archipelago where hard courts are the absolute norm, mastering this surface is the ultimate test of athletic maturity. It is the difference between a transient success and a permanent place in the upper echelons of sport. There's a distinct aura surrounding this 20-year-old athlete now, a noticeable departure from the wide-eyed teenager who dominated the junior Grand Slam circuits just a few seasons ago. The transition from a promising prospect to a genuine, rankings-destroying threat on the main tour is the most perilous journey in professional sports. Many gifted juniors never survive the crossing. They find themselves bruised by the relentless, week-in, week-out physical brutality of the senior ranks. Yet, the performance we witnessed on the historic clay of the Foro Italico in Rome suggested that this particular transition is nearing completion. Reaching the round of 32 at a mandatory WTA 1000 event is no small feat. It is a declaration of intent. The victories achieved on that heavy Italian dirt were not product of luck or opponent collapse. They were earned through tactical discipline, physical endurance, and refusal to be intimidated by the imposing figures across the net. When you look at the way she carried herself against the world number 2, Elena Rybakina, you saw a player who believed she belonged on that stage. The scoreline may have favored the Kazakh champion in the end, but the substance of the match told a far more nuanced story. It was an invaluable seminar in high-stakes tennis for a young woman who is rapidly learning how to live in the deep end of the pool. To dissect that encounter in Rome is to understand both the current capabilities and immediate developmental requirements of the young Filipina. Elena Rybakina represents the absolute gold standard of modern power tennis. She is a player who strips you of time, whose first serve arrives with the velocity of a meteor, and whose flat baseline ground strokes leave no room for defensive frailty. For a young player still developing the physical core required to withstand that level of sustained violence, the match was a revelation. What stood out most vividly was a refusal to retreat. On clay, when faced with supreme power hitter, the natural instinct of the inexperienced player is to drop 10 feet behind the baseline, to attempt to retrieve and to hope for errors. That is a slow form of suicide on the red dirt. Instead, we saw an aggressive posture. We saw a willingness to take the ball on a rise, to use a left-handed forehand to create angles that push Rybakina out of her comfort zone. The left-handed advantage in tennis is a historical truth that remains potent. From Monica Seles to Rafael Nadal, the natural spin of a southpaw alters the geometry of court. It creates a ball that jumps away from the conventional right-handed backhand, forcing opponents to hit from uncomfortable heights and positions. This weapon is becoming central to the Filipina's identity on the dirt. The tactical identity of this young star is rooted in an aggressive baseline counterpunching style, but is rapidly evolving into something far more proactive. Her movement across the clay has improved dramatically. Sliding on this surface is an art form. It is not merely about stopping. It is about using the slide to transition smoothly into the next stroke, maintaining balance so that the recovery step is instantaneous. In Rome, you could see the fruits of extensive training in the elite academies of Europe. The balance at the moment of contact was exquisite. Even when pulled wide into the tram lines, she managed to keep her shoulders level, allowing her to generate sufficient depth on the defensive ball to prevent Rybakina from stepping into the court to finish the point. This technical proficiency under extreme duress is what separates the top 50 players from the rest of the field. It is a physical literacy that cannot be faked. It requires thousands of hours of repetitive, exhausting work on the practice courts, learning to love the dirt, learning to accept the fact that your socks and your hair will be stained with red brick dust for weeks on end. However, the match against Rybakina also highlighted the vulnerabilities that must be addressed if the transition to a true Grand Slam contender is to be realized. The second serve remains a target for the Tour's elite returners. At this level, any second serve that sits up in the hitting zone without sufficient kick or depth is dealt with ruthlessly. Rybakina repeatedly punished anything short, stepping inside the baseline to dictate the point from the very first strike. Improving the variance and the hidden intent of that second delivery must be a priority for the coaching staff. It is not necessarily about raw speed. It is about location, about using the slice to pull the receiver wide or the heavy kick to jump into the opponent's body. Furthermore, the emotional energy expended during these high-intensity matches is immense. When you are carrying the hopes of an entire nation, every unforced error feels like a public misfortune. Learning to compartmentalize that pressure, to view a missed forehand not as a national tragedy, but simply as an isolated technical error, is a psychological hurdle that must now be cleared. The venue now changes to Strasbourg, and the stakes are raised. A WTA 500 event in the week immediately preceding a Grand Slam is a fascinating psychological crucible. The draw is notoriously brutal. It is populated by two distinct groups of players: those desperate for match play after early exits in Madrid or Rome, and elite competitors looking to fine-tune their tactical patterns under genuine match conditions. There are no easy rounds in Strasbourg. The qualifying draw itself is a minefield of veteran clay court specialists and ambitious young talents who view a win over a rising star as a shortcut to prominence. For the Filipina, entering this environment with massive digital spotlight focused on her every move creates a unique set of challenges. The local tournament organizers, long accustomed to the quiet bourgeois crowd that typically populates the Alsatian stands, are suddenly dealing with an influx of passionate fans, digital journalists, and an online viewership that rivals the figures seen during the later rounds of the tournament itself. It is a collision of worlds. Let us look closely at the physical conditions that await her in Strasbourg. The courts here often play slightly differently than those in Italy. Rome can be hot, causing the ball to bounce high and fast, rewarding heavy topspin. Strasbourg situated in the northeast of France near the German border, can frequently experience cooler, more humid conditions in late May. A heavy atmosphere means a heavier ball. The clay becomes damp, absorbing the spin and reducing the height of the bounce. This requires a significant adjustment in tactical thinking. On a heavier court, raw power becomes less effective, and the value of court positioning and variety skyrockets. The drop shot, when executed with precise disguise, becomes a deadly weapon because the damp clay deadens a bounce, making recovery nearly impossible for an opponent caught behind the baseline. The slice backhand, kept low and skidding through the court, can disrupt the rhythm of those players who rely on a clean, waist-high strike. This is where the veteran hockey puck intelligence of the sport comes into play. It is about reading the environment, understanding how the weather at 2 o'clock in the afternoon affects the tension of your strings, and altering your strategy accordingly. The ranking implications of this week are profound. The WTA rankings are a relentless, unforgiving ledger. They do not care about potential. They only recognize points earned and points defended. Following her successful campaign in the Italian capital, she is projected to climb significantly, moving closer to that crucial threshold that ensures direct entry into main draws of future Grand Slams without the hazard of playing through 3 rounds of qualifying. Every victory in Strasbourg adds valuable currency to that bank. To avoid the qualifying draws at the U.S. Open later this year, a sustained run over the next month is essential. The mental toll of playing qualifying matches cannot be overstated. You are forced to play 3 extra matches against highly motivated, dangerous opponents before the tournament proper even begins. By the time you reach the first round of the main draw, your energy reserves are already depleted. Your muscles are carrying lactic acid, and your mental focus has been tested to its limits. Securing direct entry is the first major milestone in a young player's career. It allows for more structured preparation, a more deliberate tapering of physical energy, and the luxury of knowing precisely when and who you will play. Behind this athletic ascent lies a complex sociological narrative that deserves closer examination. The phenomenon of the Pinoy tennis fan is something entirely new to the traditional structures of the European Tour. Historically, tennis fans in places like France or Great Britain are quiet, analytical, and deeply respectful of the traditional etiquette of the sport. They applaud good shots from both players. They maintain absolute silence during the service motion. The energy coming from the Filipino diaspora and the online communities tracking this journey is fundamentally different. It is celebratory. It is loud. It treats a tennis match with the same collective passion that one might find at a collegiate basketball rivalry in Manila. This is not a negative development. On the contrary, it is precisely the kind of injection of new life that a sometimes staid sport desperately needs. However, for the player at the center of this storm, it requires an exceptional degree of emotional maturity to manage. When 45,000 people are searching for a live stream of a qualifying match at an intermediate tournament in France, the pressure to perform is no longer an abstract concept. It is a palpable, living thing that sits in the locker room with you. The role of the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, where she has spent a significant portion of her developmental years, cannot be ignored in this context. That institution is built on a philosophy of suffering. It teaches players to embrace the discomfort of the long rally, to find a way to win when your game is functioning at only 60%, and to respect the opponent regardless of their rank. You can see that DNA in her competitive character. There is no showmanship. There are no theatrical displays of frustration. When a decision goes against her, or when a shot misses by millimeters, there's a quiet walk back to the baseline, a cleaning of the lines of the sole of the shoe, and a refocusing on the next point. This stoicism is a precious asset. It is what allows a player to survive the lonely stretches of a long match when the forehand has lost its timing, and the crowd is pulling for the hometown favorite. It is the quality that coaches value above all others, the ability to remain emotionally level when the world around you is in a state of chaotic excitement. Consider the landscape of the women's tour in 2026. We are living in an era of intense competition at the top, dominated by figures who have established a fierce rivalry. Yet, beneath that elite tier, there is a constant, shifting battle for relevance. The gap between the number 20 in the world and the number 80 is narrower than it has ever been in the history of the Open era. Physical preparation, sports science, and video analysis have democratized the sport. Anyone can hit a great forehand. Anyone can run for 3 hours. The difference now lies in the small margins, the ability to execute a second serve return down breakpoint, the tactical flexibility to change plans mid-match when your primary strategy is failing, and the mental resilience to handle the unique pressures of the global spotlight. This is the arena into which the young Filipina is stepping. She is no longer an anonymous qualifier hoping for a good day. She is a targeted prospect, an opponent whose matches are scouted, whose patterns are analyzed on laptops and player lounges, and whose weaknesses are systematically exposed by experienced coaches. This is the true definition of professional tennis. It is a game of chess played at 120 miles an hour on a surface that changes with the weather. The transition from Rome to Strasbourg also involves a shift in tournament prestige that alters the psychological dynamic. In Rome, you are part of a massive dual-gender event spread across the historic grounds of the Foro Italico. It is easy to get lost in the crowd, to fly beneath the radar, while the world focus remains firmly fixed on the icons of the sport. In Strasbourg, at a dedicated WTA 500 event, the tournament is more intimate, the focus is sharper, and the media presence is more concentrated. For a player commanding the level of international attention that she currently does, there is no hiding. The local journalists are curious about this Southeast Asian sensation who has brought an army of digital followers to their quiet tournament. The tournament director is delighted by the ticket sales and the online engagement. Every practice session becomes a public event, with cameras capturing every sweat-soaked shirt and every consultation with her coaching team. This is a reality of stardom in the modern era. It is an additional weight that must be carried alongside the tennis rackets and the medical supplies. As we look toward the horizon, beyond the immediate matches in Strasbourg and the looming challenge of Roland Garros, we are forced to contemplate what this moment portends for the next 5 years of women's tennis. The sport is historically cyclical. We see eras defined by specific geographies, the American dominance of the Everett and Navratilova years, the German ascendancy of Steffi Graf, the Russian wave that followed the success of Anastasia Moskina and Maria Sharapova, and the recent brilliance emerging from Eastern Europe. We may well be standing at the precipice of a new frontier, one where the vast, untapped sporting passion of Southeast Asia finally finds its voice on the global tennis stage. If this young woman can sustain her trajectory, if she can transform this current wave of momentum into a permanent residency inside the world's top 20, the implications for the development of the sport in our home region are immeasurable. We will see courts built, resources allocated, and a new generation of children picking up rackets in Manila, Cebu, and beyond, believing that the red clay of Paris is not a distant mythical kingdom, but a destination that is entirely within their reach. Where does she sit right now in the grand pantheon of her nation's sporting history? The Philippines has produced legendary figures in boxing, billiards, and weightlifting, disciplines that require an extraordinary degree of individual grit, resilience, and a capacity to emerge from challenging circumstances. Tennis, however, has traditionally been viewed as a sport requiring a structural infrastructure that was simply unavailable in the archipelago. To challenge that assumption is perhaps her greatest achievement to date. She is proving that the qualities that define Filipino sporting greatness, the fierce competitive spirit, the emotional warmth, the refusal to yield under immense pressure, are perfectly suited to the lonely battles of the tennis court. She is carving out a completely new space in the national consciousness. Yet, many unresolved questions remain suspended in the air as the European summer begins to warm the clay. Can the physical frame withstand the brutal demands of a full season on the main tour without breaking down? Can the technical adjustments to the serve be integrated seamlessly under the pressure of Grand Slam match points? How will she handle the inevitable periods of loss of form, the injuries, and the moments when the digital applause turns to critical scrutiny? These are the questions that every great champion has had to answer. They are the trials that refine raw talent into enduring greatness. Tennis is a beautiful, cruel sport because it leaves you entirely alone to find the answers. There are no teammates to hide behind, no coaches allowed on the court to offer guidance during the heat of battle. It is just you, your opponent, and the yellow ball moving across the net. The final thoughts of any veteran observer watching this journey unfold must be couched in a sense of patient appreciation. We should not demand too much too soon from a 20-year-old athlete who is still discovering the limits of her own potential. The road to the top of the sport is rarely a straight line. It is a winding, often painful path filled with unexpected detours and difficult lessons. What matters is a direction of travel, and right now, that direction is unmistakably upward. As she prepares to take the court in Strasbourg, surrounded by the quiet elegance of old Europe and the loud, passionate hopes of a distant archipelago, one can only feel a deep sense of gratitude for a sport that can still surprise us, that can still expand borders, and that can still find new voices to sing its ancient song. The true measure of this journey will not be found solely in the trophies won or the ranking points accumulated. It will be found in the way she has made a nation feel, in the way she has brought 50,000 people together in the dead of night, thousands of miles away, simply to watch a ball bounce on a field of red clay. That is the true magic of the game. It is a story that is still being written one baseline rally at a time.